Did you know that you are wonderfully weird? You've been created to be as unique and one of a kind as your fingerprint, fearfully and wonderfully made, created in the image of God. My name is John Waters, and over the next few minutes, Drake Hunter, senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and author of the book Wonderfully Weird, now available through Westbow Press, will help you learn more about your own wonderful weirdness. Now, Wonderfully Weird Living. We do welcome you back once again to Wonderfully Weird Living, the podcast featuring author, pastor, speaker, Drake Hunter, who just happens to be in studio with me here today. Hello there.
Hello, and thank you for having me in studio.
It's amazing how you happen to drop by just at the right time every week to be on this podcast.
Yes, it's almost like it's on my calendar.
I know, right? Oh, it's always a pleasure to see this on my calendar as well and get together and talk about our wonderfully weird lives, which everyone has. Everyone has that wonderfully weird life and is wonderfully weirdly made, and that's what we're here to discuss. And today, the topic is one that I think gets lost all too often in the, and I'm going to use the word religious community.
Yes.
And that is humor.
Yeah, where did the bad reputation come from in the church, let's say, or maybe even in society with humor? It's mind-boggling.
It's almost like it's taboo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so why so serious?
Well, and that's exactly it. And I'm going to borrow from your message on Sunday here a little bit. You said this, I have the manuscript in front of me, so I'm
Yes.
going to quote you from Sunday. You said, "Can I ask you this question today? When's the last time you had a good laugh and allowed yourself not to take everything so seriously? What is it in you that allows you to not take everything so serious? Please understand at times we must ask ourselves, why so serious?" And this is especially poignant and needed right now, I think, in the throes of the coronavirus pandemic, where there is so much seriousness all around us. We have to take time to find the humor.
Yeah, we have to find the value in that in these times. Otherwise, what is going to be that's feeding your soul? Actually, what's feeding your body? Because we know with humor, the endorphins are released, and there's what I call a God cocktail happening inside our physical body with endorphins and dopamine, and of course oxytocin that really helps us feel a sense of delight, if you will, in who we are and what this is all about. So very, very important.
Well, and that leads us right into a passage that you used on Sunday from Psalm 37, verse 4. You used the word delight. It's right here. "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And let's say right now the desire of people's hearts is to have some peace and some good feeling throughout this time of this pandemic. How do you get that? Well, it says right here, take delight in the Lord, a.k.a. humor.
Humor, yes, which is pleasurable. Mm-hmm. And I think, with the question or the comment we made at the very beginning, where we've taken pleasure out of the experience when it comes to, let's say, I got my quotes up here, religious, events or church, and it's part of the makeup. It's part of how God designed us to be. And yes, we have different preferences and perhaps how we, share humor or practice it. But it is definitely an element or an aspect of who we are. And we see it in Jesus as well. In fact, going back to one of my favorite verses, Isaiah chapter 11, it's one of the elements of Jesus and his spirit, the stump of Jesse, where the spirit of delight. And no, it's not just one aspect of delight. There's many things that bring pleasure, but the point is here is that in the content of what delight is, humor is absolutely one of those means, if you will, to truly help us in a time of need. And we need that right now.
Well, and I think maybe there's some confusion too, Drake, in that the word humor, people think Well, I'm not a joke teller. And yes, telling jokes may be a part of humor, but what I see it as, and what I got out of what you preached on Sunday, is expanding and opening your mind to
Yes.
all sides of a situation, and seeing that nothing is ever as bad as we tend to think it is. Nothing is ever as good as we tend to think it is. But yet there is that cheer that's available that comes through faith in every situation.
Just went to Proverbs, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Proverbs 17:22.
That's right.
Yeah, that says a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a lot of crushed spirits right now.
You know, you look in history too, and of course in my work with Wonderfully Weird and Divine Prosperity and other works I have, there's what is known as the four humors that Hippocrates made well known with these different fluids, and that is how they used to heal in that particular time in history. And so it's been a subject, if you will, for centuries, and it's just so well rounded in the sense of how we should understand it today, because there's a lot out there going, oh yeah, it's definitely cheerful, and it's medicine to the soul, and it really is. And of course, humor and laughter, we do have to delineate there, because humor, I kind of compare it to joy versus happiness, because you have humor in the sense of who you are, and then you have laughter, because humor is just a means of laughter, but so is laughing gas, and so is tickling my 6-year-old granddaughter.
Right.
But that humor, when we can get it into our mindset, into our mindfulness, and we truly begin thinking with a delightful, we'll even say a humorous way of thinking, will produce a delightful experience for other, and actually be part of our service where other people can laugh with us. Very powerful.
So one of the things that, again, going back to your message on Sunday, that you were pointing out that
Yes.
I thought was very interesting as well, is not all humor is created equally. There's good humor,
Yes.
but there's also that, I'll use the word bad or dark humor that many times does not add value. In fact, it takes value away.
Yes, and this isn't in my notes or the manuscript, but if you go back to the Great Commission in Matthew 28, you can see the whole theme of Matthew 28, we'll say verses, I want to say 18 through the end of the chapter, where he's giving a great commission, he's giving his authority and what that is. But at the very last piece of that thought that he's sharing, that command actually, he says, my presence. So the whole theme is, I have authority, but this is for our people in the sense of Christianity, in providing a sense of goodness in my presence. So, the goal for humor for any Christian is to provide goodness rather than the opposite, which would be darkness. And oftentimes we're just a little ignorant in this. We want to use humor, dark humor, and then we kind of justify it, and then not realizing we're causing some damage and hurting folks. And so it's pretty black and white in the sense of, if it hurts somebody, whatever the type, whatever the theory, whatever that might be for you, even the disposition of who you are, if it's hurting somebody, we're commanded to not do that, because it's no longer good. It's no longer adding value. So we have to be very discerning with our humor. We have to be very observant in seeing what's going on and what's the best thing to do. And of course, the best thing to do oftentimes, because we want to just react and put it out there because it is funny, but we have to be so careful, because we have a responsibility, as Jesus shared with us in Matthew 28, that commission is, we really want to provide goodness so that you can be in the presence of the Lord with us. And so how important that is, and you have to be extremely mindful with that type of, position in your life, and it's not easy.
Well, I'm going to reveal something about myself that anybody who knows me already knows, but I love satire. You and I were talking about this a little
Yes.
bit before we started recording. I'm a very satirical person in
Right.
myself. Right. I use a lot of satire in my own humor, which to me is hilariously funny.
Yeah.
but yet it doesn't always get the reaction that I think it would, because, and as hard as this is for me to admit to myself, not everybody's made the same way I am.
That's right. Yes. And I was speaking with a gentleman last night with regards to the message on Sunday, and because he came back and he was he just wanted to have a little discussion about his friends. Well, if you know that, Steve, like you and I are really good friends, and just in our close, intimate times, we can connect, and we have agreeable ways that we accept one another, and satire is one, and that's perfectly safe. That's why it's fine. So the key is making sure that people are in agreement with that, in the sense of what that is, so that it's safe and everybody is accepting of it, and you really enjoy that good time, that good laughter together. But as you well know, the challenge comes when it's one-sided. It becomes all about me. So I'm all that in a bag of Doritos with the Mountain Dew on the side, and then all of a sudden they're not thinking, and they're just a little bit, especially with what is known as, what is that called, superiority type of humor. That's tough for me, because there's people that think they're one up on you, and they just speak down to you through their passive aggressive, let's say, humor, or how they talk about jokes. So passive aggressive. I have very little room for that.
Well, as you talk about in your book, Wonderfully Weird, and by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't have a copy of the book yet, you need to get it immediately. There, we got that in.
Oh, thank
anyway,
you, sir.
There are 4 different temperaments that God has created people with, 4
yes.
basic temperaments.
Yeah.
And the humor, the type of humor that a person deems appropriate, has a lot to do with what their own temperament is. And I may understand that as the eagle, I have a very satirical type of humor.
Yes.
But yet, my wife, who is the man temperament, as you are,
Yes.
A different type of humor appeals to her. And so many times something that I will say to her that I think is hilariously funny, she will be offended by, and it ends up causing problems because I was thinking of it from my point of view, not hers. And she's the one I'm delivering it to, so I need to be seeing it. How is she going to receive this?
Yes, the NFs, or we can say the man in my book, NF and the Myers-Briggs, we tend to wear our emotions on our sleeves, and our humor is probably the same way, because we're very sensitive with the meaning of somebody else, and you're like, hey, that hurt a little bit. Mm-hmm. And of course, we can become very catastrophic with that as well, because we have to also be aware that, oh, come on, it is just a little bit of humor, and don't take it so serious. But at the same time, we're very sensitive to both sides. That's what Christianity is all about, is being with God, myself, and with others. So yes, different. Let's say, I'm going to say predisposition. A lot of people want to say disposition, and you can create that, but how God designed you will depend on what direction you're going to go with your preference in humor and maybe joke telling, if we go in that direction. So, yes, let's see. You said satire definitely for the NT or the eagle in my book. NF we already talked about, or the man. The ox, or let's say the SJ type of humor is, I would say, playful, but in an elementary way. Very surface and very acceptable among the culture or the society that they may be involved in. And then, of course, the SP is just they're just trying to be impactful, and that's the lion in my book, and so depends on the situation with those lions. They can kind of they're the sanguine in the 4 humors of Hippocrates, and which is. What's that animal that changes colors all the time?
A chameleon?
Chameleon, yeah. And they can change colors or change or adapt to environment.
Well, and very physical in humor too,
yes.
Right?
Oh, very slapstick, yes.
Yeah.
Very physical, and they really want to make an impact, and they'll pretty much sacrifice. They take big risks. In fact, they just go out there and jump off the cliff just to get a laugh.
Right, right. Yeah. So by looking at and reading Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, you begin to get more of an understanding of each of those four basic temperaments and how they perceive things, which helps a lot then when it comes to humor. I know in my particular case, as we've talked about so many times, I have to weigh my thoughts and my words before I say that thing that I think is hilariously funny. Is my wife going to perceive it the same way that I intend it, or am I going to have to do a lot of backtracking and explaining and fence mending after I say this thing?
Yeah, exactly right. And so Paul said, "I become all things to all people." And of course, when we have that understanding, as I share in my book and other areas, that's our responsibility, and
Now,
we need to take responsibility in that.
one of the other things, and this kind of points to the other side of it, and I've been very guilty of this in my life, as I think most people have, is using, and I'm going to air quote, humor as a weapon.
Defense, yes. Yeah, in fact, at the end of the message, there are some things we need to do. What we need to stop doing is actually using humor as a defense, either to attack or to cover something up, where we're avoiding some serious subjects or topics that we really need to bring to the table. Because if we're going to be defensive on one side or the other with that particular conversation, we're definitely not using it in a way that was intended to be used. Passive aggressive or defensive, let's say Christianity, is I would consider that part of that dark humor type of situation, and it's a cheap way to communicate, and it's a hurtful way, because we often know, if we're brutally honest, you've been there, John, I've been there, with our wives, with our kids perhaps, and we'll go, I need to get a point here, but because I don't have enough courage, what we do, or somebody will do, is we try to passive aggressive get that out there to open it up, and then we say, if they don't take it properly, we were just joking.
I was just joking.
And can't you just can't, you don't need to take yourself so serious. Yeah, let's be so careful with that. That's very immature in the sense of being that Christ-like person, and we don't use humor to let's say cut the spiritual ears off, or the spiritual understanding, whatever that might be, as we see Peter doing with Jesus as he's being taken away. He cut off physical ears as an SP, that line, but we can often do that with our words. And our humor.
It's almost like calling evil good and good evil. Huh?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's from Isaiah 5. In fact, I know it is.
And you know your Bible well.
Yeah, when I have your manuscript right in front of me here. Yeah, Isaiah 5:20 and 21. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who turn darkness to light and light to darkness, who replace bitter with sweet and sweet with bitter.
Yeah.
Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. Let me just say, ouch.
Yes.
That is kind of painful for me because of my type of humor that I tend to default to, where I do have to backtrack many times and say to my wife or whoever the case may be, I'm only joking. Don't you get it? You know, it's just a joke.
Now, you hear me often say, I'm all that in a bag of Doritos with Mountain Dew on the side, or, I'll do what I want. Actually, this is where that parallel goes with Isaiah 5:20, 21 here, where you can, we're wise in our own eyes. That is, I'll do what I want. Mm-hmm. That scenario, and of course, others that I'll do. So I'm using humor even with this, with this verse here, but how true it is. And here's the thing is, we're all ignorant in some areas, so I'm going to coach John here on the air. I know
Please
he
do.
understands. I know you already understand, but we're ignorant. But here's the thing is, that is not necessarily the sin, is it? It's once we know and we choose to be ignorant in that, and we no longer make the decision or choose to go on the good path, if you will, or that good sense of humor. Because people are like, this is who I am, they don't like it, too bad. And too bad for them. Christian, That we're no longer in that, we don't have that perspective anymore. Our worldview is, I want the best for me, the best for you, the best for all. And we grow together, standing on those principles of God, aligning ourselves with the Good Shepherd, where we're truly acting, or we have actions that reflect and express God's ministry, the Holy Spirit, right? Together with God and each other.
There was a historical figure that some people may have heard of. His name was Jesus. And I believe he said, "I did not come to be served, but I came to serve."
Jesus, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of bring this back around now.
Okay.
And we started with Psalm 37:4, take delight in the Lord. So let's talk about how we do that, how we turn it around and take delight in the Lord, or the humor of the Lord is how you said it on Sunday. What is the humor of the Lord?
Oh,
and
what
you used Ephesians 5:4 to set that up.
Yes, let there be no filthiness, or it says foolish talk or crude joking. That's the ESV. I love that that translation. It's a word for word translation, and really speaking actually towards some of the crude humor that's actually that the Ephesians were dealing with. And so we have Paul here instructing and guiding them to that goodness, which are, he talks about that crude joking, which are out of place. And anytime that is not adding value to the other, or to the experience, if you will, it's out of place, as Paul shares. But instead, let there be a laughter of thanksgiving, where everybody can connect and truly be together, and paying attention to what that truly is, understanding what life is in that particular circumstance and situation like we're in, or even feeling together, because you might feel really good and that might give your soul a delight, but the other person is now in stressed, or whatever that might be for them. You're not together. You're no longer together, and you have no rhythm. You're only one-sided. You're just like, as Paul says in other places, that resounding gong. There is no love there. Going to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Come on, folks, we got to come together. That's one of the spiritual needs, isn't it?
Right.
Understanding, togetherness, and influence, which in our humor at church we call it the UTI method.
Right.
As a nurse would use, not use it, but in the sense of that acronym.
That just helps me to remember
Yeah,
things.
you came up with that.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Let's help people remember it anyway. Well, so instead of those crude and filthy jokes, or dark humor, or maybe even, like in my case, using situations to be, what's the word that I was using earlier?
Satire?
Satire, thank you. Instead of being satirical, according to Ephesians 5:4, our humor needs to be filled with thanksgiving and gratitude. And so to me, that's not only thanksgiving and gratitude to God, but to the other person as well.
Oh, yes, great commandment.
Yeah.
You just gave the great commandment. That's exactly right. And it's the most important commandment. And so, yes, and I shared that on Sunday. It might be acceptable in your own little world. That's fine, you and God. But don't forget, we're with others, and we have to be very caring in that, and even sensitive. Not that we're walking around on eggshells. That's we have a responsibility on the other side too, not to take everything so stinking personal. But everything is personal, but you can make the choice not to take it personal. Was my point there, and really learn how to receive and also filter things that aren't well for you or your self-esteem. And so I'm not quite sure where I was going with that. I kind of lost. What were we talking about?
Well, and also being aware of that other person. And so and I'll go back to my wife and I again, if I use a satirical situation or joke and it doesn't land the way that I thought it would, making the mental note of that and understanding that's something that I shouldn't do again, because it's not going to have the right impact, which goes to the Ephesians 4:29, using only things that are good for building up the other person, edifying the other person.
So I'm curious, can you give the definition of what satirical is?
Satirical, taking a situation and turning it, what's the best way to say it? Making another situation out of it,
Okay.
and making a joke of it based upon taking the worst aspects of it, maybe.
Oh, I see.
And really highlighting those, but in a quote unquote funny way.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we clarify that for the listener,
Yeah.
because it's so important that people understand satire is perfectly acceptable in those situations where there's agreed upon relationship, and so again,
Kind of like a caricature
and
almost.
I want to go back. I consider, now this is my opinion at this point, but I think people would come to agreement on this. When somebody thinks they're superior, or they present themselves with that humor in a superior way, where the blonde jokes, the racist jokes, whatever that might be, this one up, one down mentality where, wow, be very careful. We're not, God's not over us. He's not under us. We're with one another. And when you present humor in that way, you're speaking down to them, and that can become very over somebody. And it's not part of the commandment. It's with one another,
Right.
not over in the sense of just trying to get a laugh. And there's some funny things. I'm so simple. I prefer the knock jokes. Maybe that's because of my granddaughter. She just loves them. She comes up with the craziest thing. What was it, a couple of weeks ago? Knock.
Who's there?
The interrupting cow.
Yeah. Moo.
Movie, yeah. Hey, you killed my punchline, man. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's silly stuff like that, or playful. As you know, if you experience my preaching, I do everything I can to get humor engrafted into my message, because we know now with science that we can get the endorphins and the dopamine and oxytocin going with good humor, with good words put it in the right place, and it gives your soul a relaxing experience, if you will, rather than being all stressed out like most of us in the fight and flight and all that. And so I'm very intentional with my wit, let's put it that way, in my messages, just to get enough to, I call it the God cocktail, and I might have said that already, but it's so important that even in our everyday conversations, we become skillful in our ability. We have the ability to deliver those type of words and that type of wit or humor that really helps with that experience where we're sharing those chemicals together, we're sharing laughs together, we're sharing everything together, and that makes it so meaningful, and it's very accepting at the same time. And isn't that what grace is all about?
Sure.
Accepting and taking care of one another.
Well, as you know, my main occupation is I'm a radio disc jockey.
Yes.
And part of that is being entertaining and being humorous on air. But still, I have to, and my mind tends to work too quickly sometimes, but I have to make sure that I have the proper filters in place so that if I'm going to make a joke about something, I have to try to understand how is the majority of my audience going to receive this? Is
Yes.
it going to be received okay? Then it's okay. But if it's not going to be received well by a majority of my audience, I have to not use that, even though I may think it's the funniest thing I've ever come up with.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
and you come up with some pretty funny things, though.
Yeah.
I enjoy.
Well, I
your
tell
humor.
people all the time, nobody's more surprised by what comes out of my mouth than I am. So,
Yes.
well, you earlier on, Drake, you started to mention some of the things we can do to transform that disheartened wittiness, as you called it, into a delightful fear of the Lord. So let's, as we get toward the end of our time here together, let's talk about those things a little bit that we can do to make sure that we are appropriate.
Yeah, let me reintroduce those. I just shared them on Sunday, but it's refuse to belittle or degrade. Make sure that we have a discipline where we're filtering our words, filtering the goodness of words and our jest and all that to the other person. And let's stop using, we talked about that, using humor as a defense, and above all, of course, is glorify God and others with it. So again, we have to be discerning there, because sometimes it could be perfectly acceptable, but if the person in front of us, and we can assess this, are they immature or whatever that might be, we choose not to use it for their benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So-
and just laugh about it on the inside.
Yeah, yeah. And so those isn't it? It comes down to what we do. That's part of the Holy Spirit's ministry. Now we got to be inspired. We got to motivate ourselves, make some choices, and then through that we start forming our character and what we do, and that gives the expression, the image of God to others. And how important is that in the sense of ministry of Jesus Christ in our heart, and then also what we do in the ministry of the Holy Spirit in that expression, and truly creating the image of God through this movement that we're definitely focused on here in Morgan County, where we're creating that movement for Christ, where everyone benefits and becomes better, and we want them to reach their potential.
Absolutely. And be wonderfully weird.
And be wonderfully weird in that whole experience.
Absolutely. Well, as we like to do, we have some thought-provoking questions that we want to leave with you today. And the first one, I just love this because it's a self-reflecting question. When is the last time you laughed to the point of you just let it all go? And, my mind already goes to a place it shouldn't go to with that, let it all go. But hey, we'll leave that to everybody to figure out on their own. But
I did imply that in the message, though.
You did.
Yeah.
You did. When's the last time you laughed to the point of just letting it all go? Number 2, does your sense of humor align with God's way or with the desires of your own selfish heart?
Yeah.
And that's a tough one for me. And number 3, what can you do to nourish and develop a sense of humor that will add value to life and create a delightful experience? And let me add to that, for yourself and for everyone around you.
Yes, and with that particular question, that developing and nourishing that sense of humor, it depends on your temperament, how you're going to develop your sense of humor, and how God designed you to actually develop humor in a way that's going to really add to the overall plan, the bigger picture that He has, so that we can truly bring that all together. And we do experience the different variables when it comes to humor, and we can put those pieces together, and then it's just a let's say a picture of integrity with God's plan and with coming together with God and with others.
Absolutely. Well, it's always a pleasure, and the time always goes extremely fast when we get together. Seems like we, as Carol Burnett used to say in her song, seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes the time we have to say goodbye.
Yes.
So I do appreciate your time and your heart, Drake, and I will encourage folks, if you have not yet gotten your copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, please do that and read through it. I think you're going to be wonderfully amazed at what you learn about yourself and those around you through the book. So we'll give you the information here in the close of how to get your own copy of the book. So Drake, stay well, stay healthy, and we will meet again next week.
Well, thank you a million times. It was a delight.
It was a delight. Thank you for listening in to Wonderfully Weird Living. I'm John Waters. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us this week on Wonderfully Weird Living. Get your own copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, by logging on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com. Also, let us know if you have any questions or comments via our email address, wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. For author and pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters. We'll see you next time.